Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. I'm Keaton Shaw. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. I hope you had a great weekend and cheers to a grand week ahead. Now, this morning, my first conversation involves the Tobago House of Assembly. Well, as we are most aware that last week Wednesday, at the Tobago House of Assembly's special sitting, the Chief Secretary, Farley Augustine, played a video in which it is purported to have had a man who met with Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, who offered him a sum of money to sign an affidavit implicating Farley Augustine of grievous misconduct. Farley Augustine went on to accuse the Prime Minister of weaponizing the police against political enemies, inclusive of himself. Now, the Prime Minister responded last week, Thursday, via press conference, and to try and analyze and dissect this entire situation, I'm joined by no stranger to the program. He's attorney at law, Mr. Martin George. He's with us via Zoom. Hello, sir. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, hi. Good morning to you, Keaton, and good morning to your viewers on WESN Content Capital.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. George. The Prime Minister, at his press conference last week, Thursday, indicated that what the Chief Secretary did tantamounts to witness tampering. Now, in your opinion, one, could you just explain to us what is witness tampering? And two, as I said, in your opinion, whether or not you saw anything of such taking place?
Okay, so the thing is, if you have an ongoing criminal investigation in which you have a witness who has already given sworn testimony. So this would be testimony which would be not just in the form of a statement, but it would have probably been taken before a justice of the peace, or before a commissioner of affidavits. So in other words, the person is swearing that the contents of what they are saying is true. And you have that statement already, and then before the matter can proceed to trial or before the trial is concluded, there is some external attempt to have this witness either change or vary his testimony, or maybe to not give his testimony at all by some third party who is outside of the scope of the prosecution and, who has no authority so to do, then that is what you refer to basically as witness tampering. So in other words, you are trying to interfere with this witness given the evidence which the police already have. And I emphasize that point because, in other words, if they don't really have the evidence at all, then it's a different scenario we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other side of it is an actual recording of an individual where we're not entirely sure as yet. The individual in the video is due to give a statement to the media, not entirely sure when. However, with regards to the laws of Trinidad and Tobago and recording an individual, can you knowingly record an individual without their permission?
Right. So, and that's a very interesting point which the Prime Minister raised. So the thing is, Mr. Augustine admitted to all of Trinidad and Tobago that he made this recording without the person's knowledge. So the question now comes as to even the admissibility into any evidence in any proceedings of this recording and what value it will have. Because if it is that you are recording the person secretly without their knowledge, then the question arises as to the validity of this recording being tendered into evidence. I'm not sure that it necessarily amounts to a criminal offense in that sense, but it certainly can, almost be an invasion of someone's privacy if it is that you record them secretly and then now you play it back publicly without their knowledge and consent. So it may more fall in the realm of the privacy laws. Now, if it were a telephone conversation, and you were secretly recording that telephone conversation, and you think in terms of the interception of communications legislation, then you could probably be in a more difficult position if you were then to try to play that publicly the way that Mr. Augustine did with this recording. And I just want to cover a bit on the issue of the parliamentary privilege, because, some people seem to think that parliamentary privilege is an absolute blanket cover. Mm-hmm. Let's understand first first of all, the origins of the parliamentary privilege principle can be found in Erskine May's, treatise on the law, privileges, and proceedings and usage of Parliament. That is the Bible, basically, in terms of how we treat with this issue of, the conduct of parliamentary proceedings. And under Section 70 of the THA Act, they have been basically granted the same types of privileges and immunities that the national parliament enjoys. So members of the THA, assemblymen, when they are making their presentations, they are also covered by this privilege. But let's understand what the privilege is. The privilege is that you are free to make your presentation, you are free to speak on issues without fear of a defamation action or a contempt action. So it doesn't mean that you are exempted or privileged from possible criminal prosecution if during the course of your presentation some criminal conduct on your part is revealed. So I just want it to be clear that the privilege is not an absolute blanket, exemption from all proceedings. It is really to cover you from defamation actions primarily. So in other words, you are free to speak in the parliamentary chamber, in the assembly chamber, of matters without fear of facing a defamation lawsuit otherwise. This is the reason why you often see persons who are the subject of such allegations or accusations, they often say, afterwards, they say, listen, okay, if you really believe those allegations, then repeat them outside of the parliament or repeat them outside of the assembly chamber. So that way I can then take whatever action necessary against you. And that action will be an action in defamation.
And thank you very much for that clarification, Mr. George. That is absolutely crucial to this conversation. Before we get further in regard to the privileges, especially of immunity, I just wanted to know that the Prime Minister, he's also indicated that the individual within the video does not have the authorities to speak within the THA. He doesn't have any privileges. In fact, he said this is an abuse of power. Is that the case in this particular instance of which the Prime Minister was referring to?
Well, it's actually quite a unique scenario which occurred there because, in other words, while the members themselves are covered by privilege, you had a scenario here where a video was played, the audio was clearly heard with this individual speaking, and this was played into the record of the proceedings of the Tobago House of Assembly. So the questions raised by the Prime Minister are actually very valid and pertinent in this issue because it would appear that not only are you, giving a statement of what someone said, but you are actually now playing this person's video recording live in the proceedings, So it does raise some questions there as to, the propriety, first of all, and, there would also be the question as to what were members told prior to the sitting, and also, the presiding officer. Did the presiding officer know what was going to be played? Did the presiding officer approve of it? So there are quite a lot of things we have here because, in other words, you can't have people just, producing videos and them being played in the national parliament where you have scenarios of persons' characters possibly being assassinated. And then, you say, well, it's all covered by parliamentary privilege. The privilege does not extend necessarily to that person on the video. The privilege is to cover the members of the assembly or the members of the national parliament.
So any investigation now could include the individual within the video simply because of such privileges not being, well, I suppose they're not entitled to such privileges.
Well, the thing is, it may actually go wider than that because, you see, the question could arise, and I saw the Prime Minister, I think he zeroed in on that. The question arose as to the propriety of the actions of the Chief Secretary in introducing that video into the proceedings in the first place. because, the Prime Minister alluded to the question of witness tampering. As I say, I don't know what stage the police investigation is at. I don't know if this person has given the police a statement already, but the fact of the matter is that if it is that there is already a sworn witness statement from this person, then there are some questions that could arise which could be quite uncomfortable for some persons in the THU.
And you mentioned previously the role of the presiding officer. Yes, there are question marks around there as well. Whether or not the presiding officer actually executed their duties and responsibilities to the best of their ability.
Well, yes, because you see, as presiding officer, even though you may be from the bosom and belly of a particular political party, you are still supposed to be the vanguard of the proceedings for the national interest. In other words, you are not supposed to take a partisan view of things. You are supposed to objectively analyze and assess what is before you give permission for it to be played. So that's why I'm saying I don't know if the presiding officer was fully aware of the content of what was to be played, or if she had been given full information. But the fact of the matter that it occurred, it would seem to suggest that, on the face of it, that she has allowed this to happen under her watch. So if the investigation widens, it may then involve questions as to her role in all of this.
Now, I want to quote directly from the Prime Minister from last week's press conference. He said, and I quote, "I hereby call publicly, not in any conspiratorial meeting, but to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to proceed to investigate any and all people who took part in this suborning of testimony. There are provisions in the law to treat with people like that. This attempt to slander my name is now a police matter as far as I know, and I expect the police will do their job without fear or favour, without malice or ill will." In your opinion, does the Prime Minister have the authority to publicly call for a police investigation? There may be some citizens who are suggesting that he is giving the police direct orders, which should not be the case.
In a circumstance such as this, no, I don't agree that it is a case of him trying to give direct orders to the police. It's the same as if, anything happens to any other citizen or any other public figure and you say, look, I call upon the commissioner to please investigate this matter. That's not a direction or an order. It's a request and it's a suggestion, but the point is they don't have to comply with it. So I wouldn't even entertain that as a serious issue at all. He's fully entitled in this circumstance to make that request for the police to investigate it. I mean, of course, the police will determine whether it really, amounts to witness tampering or not. I mean, the Prime Minister, he has expressed his view, of course, as a layperson in that regard. He is entitled to do so, but the police would be the ones in consultation with the DPP who would determine whether there really was any actual witness tampering. But in terms of the call for the investigation, I see nothing wrong with it at all.
And do you believe that there is pressure from central government on the Farley Augustine-led THA administration?
Well, the thing is, the relationship has been very acrimonious. There's no doubt about that. And, despite the fact that early in his tenure, the two gentlemen met, I think they met at the Prime Minister's residence in Tobago. It appears that since then things have, deteriorated to the point where it's name-calling and finger-pointing and accusations and counter-accusations. I saw Mr. Ho Choi Charles, offer to mediate in the circumstances, but the point is I'm not sure that it's something that can be salvaged at this stage. It may have gone too far because, what occurred last week in the Assembly chamber, there were some wide-ranging and very damning and damaging allegations. So, it's really hard to climb down from that, The allegations, included the Commissioner of Police, noted senior counsel, and it's difficult to see how there can be some sort of rapprochement between these two goodly gentlemen in terms of repairing that relationship. In addition to which, there has been for some time a sort of narrative which has emanated from some persons in Tobago where they tend to pitch, and pivot the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago as one of, a contentious relationship and, of Tobago always being oppressed by Trinidad, which, I guess it works for them in their political space. But really and truly, we have to understand that we are a twin island nation. We're part of one nation. So, this acrimonious relationship and this constant tension and, backbiting and, infighting is really not assisting anybody. And it's not good for either Trinidad or Tobago or for us as one nation of Trinidad and Tobago.
I think you've just, majored a point there that we tend to forget, that we are a twin island republic. We are one nation. And you're absolutely right to reinforce that point. Because as I said, I wonder sometimes if we tend to forget, we are of the opinion, of the mindset that Tobago and Trinidad are separate. But Mr. George, before I release you this morning from this particular conversation, how does this affect the position, the political position of the Farley Augustine-led administration with Tobagonians, that relationship with Tobagonians, and by extension, the Prime Minister and central government's relationship with Tobagonians?
Well, the thing is that there are quite a few Tobagonians who I think they feel very proud and they stand up, basically beating their chests to say, well, yes, Mr. Augustine is standing up and fighting for Tobago. So they see it from, as I say, that same contentious perspective that, well, we are in a war with Trinidad, so therefore, there must be this constant fighting, in other words, to assert yourself. However, if you've studied, for instance, books like the 48 Laws of Power, and you studied books like The Art of War, you would understand that not all war is won by this direct confrontation. Sometimes you have to be a bit more subtle. You have to be a bit more, diplomatic in your approach. So, as I say, there are some who they love it. They love this brouhaha and the bacchanal. But of course, the more sober and rational minds amongst us would be wondering, what are you really achieving for Tobago by this? Because at the end of the day, your allocations come from central government, your budget comes from central government. Every year you go with, a shopping list to central government, so therefore, if it is that this is basically the hand that is feeding you, whether you like it or not, if you understand me. So we're not into the question of whether it's fair or right that you should have to be getting your allocation from central government. That is the reality. Basically, we know the old adage about biting the hand that is feeding you. And it just appears not to be the best policy for a long-term sustainable relationship. This is just my simple view. Of course, nothing's wrong with standing up for the rights of Tobago and Tobagonians and, fighting for it. But there has to be a way that you do things that you can still make your point. So in other words, you could disagree without being disagreeable. And that's something I always say. And I always encourage persons to have respect for public offices. And I have seen a level of, disrespect and, name calling that I am not particularly happy about at all, because it doesn't set a good example for the young people. It doesn't set a good example for our children. And, when you start to try to destroy the institutions which form the pillars of our society, then I will always part ways with you, because that could never be good for nation building or constructive criticism in terms of developing Trinidad and Tobago.
Mm-hmm. You and I both, Mr. George, share in that disappointment, very, very much so. But a fitting way to conclude this morning's conversation. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Thank you very much for sharing this information and knowledge with us. And I do wish you a very good day ahead.
It's always a pleasure, and a very good morning to you and your team at WESN, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much, sir. All the best to you.